I work in the communications office at the University of Warwick, so I kind of work in comms and PR. Sometimes I feel that puts me on the side of evil rather than the side of good. And I often find myself standing on the shoulders of giants, the kind of people around us, the team in IT services, in our academic community, who do an awful lot of excellent work, and then I get to stand in front of people and tell people about it. So it's a really interesting place to work, and what I want to do is kind of explore some of the things that are going on and talk a little bit about creativity, media production, and how I feel it's impacting on higher education a bit. I picked up this comment from Steve Bobrick talking about the BBC earlier this week and saying it's a truism that institutions that are important in one era find it difficult to maintain their relevance, and that the BBC is just starting on what it thinks is now its second great era, but that it's going to be markedly different from the one that's gone before. And you kind of feel that higher education's in that sort of position at the moment. We're in that possibility now where we could just be, if the kind of things that we've been talking about today come to fruition, we could be talking about the second great era of higher education, and that what happens in the future is going to be substantially different to the kind of environments that we have become used to. There are moments in history, you think, where there are kind of great geniuses appear and do things that genuinely transform the environment. The Goon Show, when that sort of hit post-war Britain, was something that was completely different, really, really different. I mean, well, two geniuses and a short Welshman. But they came along and they did something that was quite radical, very different, very, very creative. And what you kind of see is that the ripples that kind of moment of creativity, that moment of genius, kind of extended for decades, and we still see the kind of influences that those individuals had on comedy, on the way that we think about humor and all those sorts of things that have kind of generated this huge richness, this rich environment that we now find. I'll leave it to your own decisions to whether they are genuinely inheritors of the Goon Show, but you can sort of see there's a narrative and a parallels. And without those moments of genius, those moments of wonderful creativity, then perhaps these things wouldn't have happened. And you kind of feel, looking at the higher education at the moment, we're in a moment of explosive creativity. We are surrounded. I don't think I've ever in my working life been in an environment where I go to work each week and I see at least 3 or 4 things a week that I stand back and think, that's outstanding. That's genuinely new and interesting. Whether it's new technologies or somebody who's posted a video that kind of makes you sort of really sit back and think very, very hard about the kind of environment that you're working in, or doing something new, and it could be a staff member or students. And we are at a point at which there is so much creativity going on. Not all of it brilliant, and let's face it, Spike Milligan did some bloody awful stuff as well. But for every kind of every 10 brilliant ideas, 2 or 3 of them will stick and will be truly transformative. And I think that's the kind of place that we are now. What gets interesting from an institutional perspective is how do we take all of that extraordinary activity, how do we take that maverick creativity, those things that are unusual and stand out, and make them ordinary? And I don't mean ordinary in the sense of dull, but ordinary in the sense of, as John's saying, part of the core, part of something that is what we are, what universities are, that just becomes part of the ordinary day-to-day working of a particular institution. And sustainable as well. I think there's a lot of discussion at the moment about lots of projects that have kicked off and impressed and done lots of interesting things, and as the credit crunch bites and as kind of funding decides to move on to new priorities, how do we build some of these innovative, exciting projects for e-learning and other things, how do we build them so that they're sustainable in the long term and not dependent on the largesse of a particular research fund or a research grant? How do we move this stuff into the core business and make it just an ordinary part of what universities do? And I don't think it's necessarily about techno-lust or techno-porn or wanting to kind of, it's not necessarily about focusing on the technology. From a communications perspective, it's about organizational vision, institutional vision, or the vision of individuals taking that technology and doing really interesting things with it. It's about organisational behaviour. It's about our universities, the point made earlier about the old farts sitting around sort of telling you that you can't do things. It's about organisations being prepared to adapt and change and to kind of move from that first era into that second era where things are different, and recognising that and embracing it and being part of it. It's about skills, not just, it's been commented today about digital literacy and things like that, and how do we enable, our students are digitally literate. We have a lot of people, there's been a lot of discussion about students using this kind of stuff. Our faculty, different matter. We have points of wonderful excellence in our academic community, and large numbers of people for whom there's still a long way to go before they're able and ready to adapt and use this stuff. And not just that, but making it easy for them, making it ordinary, making it part of the day-to-day, as opposed to another burden on their already time-poor schedule. And I think it is about creativity as well. I think it's about finding new ways to use this stuff and not just replicating the same old, same old. Lectures are a wonderful way of imparting knowledge, but they're a fairly old mechanism for actually doing that. And they're not necessarily the best mechanism for the digital age. And so filling up iTunes U with millions of lectures may be easy, but is it necessarily the best way to use that technology? Or are there other modes of content that are more effective for this kind of era? Some Warwick observations. Warwick's been doing lots and lots of different things with digital media over the last couple of years. I myself have been looking at a lot of communications-led projects, looking at how we can use podcasting and online video to do interesting things about explaining Warwick research and sort of talking about the expertise of the university. And some of you may have seen the Warwick iCast programs. Some of you may download the Warwick podcasts. In and of themselves, I think they've been great projects. Really interesting to work on, lots of learning, lots of understanding about video that I previously didn't know, and I think it's been a really good exercise about embedding some of these technologies within the academic faculty. They've seen it, they've interacted with it, some of them have taken part, and it's now just part of the norm. People understand it, they know about it, and they feel comfortable with it. But one of the things that has kind of bugged me, well, two things that have bugged me about the project now that we've kind of reached the end of the funding. First of all, we've reached the end of the funding. a sort of fairly significant problem. So what do we do next? We can't sort of, university budgets being what they are, credit crunch, and we'll see what happens at the next sort of issue of university finance. But we can't necessarily continue to fund some of these projects in the way that iCast was funded, bringing in external expertise to help us produce it. And the second thing that's bugged me about it a little bit is that I think as we worked on the project, I think I increasingly got to a point where I felt that it was a project that was about the University of Warwick, but not necessarily of the University of Warwick. And I think what was happening is that we were tending to produce content that was that was almost like Sky News coming in and telling the Warwick story, rather than Warwick being able to tell its own story. By the flip side, our e-learning team and IT services were doing some great projects that were very much of Warwick, very much learning, very much content-driven, but not necessarily being presented in the best way, and not necessarily the sort of thing that you would think represented Warwick in the best light if you were going to hand it over to an external audience. I'm saying that as a communications person. Staff and students individually doing very, very brilliant things, but the kind of level of coordination meant that often it was kind of, where do we go for support, where do we seek help with this? And I think the lesson that we've learned over the last couple of years, and has really been driven home over the last 6 months, is the need for a tighter network supporting creativity. Communications, IT, learning, staff and students, and external audiences, and the people who are the end users of this content, not just thinking about our internal communities, but the people outside of that, working together to create something that's truly expressive of what Warwick University actually is, who we are, what we do, and why we do it. And in my mind, that seems to me to be a challenge that means a little bit more than just filming lectures. I think it's about in looking at how we generate digital content in a much broader way and explore a much wider sense of what a university is. So, some of the kind of issues around supporting creativity and the things that I think we've really brought to a head over the last couple of months, last sort of 6 to 12 months. I think encouraging creativity demands that you are happy to make mistakes. And remember, I work in public relations and communications. I think people making mistakes is great, and I'm quite happy for people to do things and do it wrong. The issue is that if you're going to fail, and we will get things wrong. If you're going to fail, you will fail again, but fail better. And I think creativity is about being brave and encouraging risk-taking, allowing people to do things differently, not restricting the model to one or two ways of doing it. And again, I'm coming at this from a communications background. Traditionally, you'd like to control the way things are done. But I think we have to recognize that there are many, many different ways of telling the story, many, many different ways of exploring and finding out what we are. And one of the sort of, it's about encouraging experimentation and seeking opportunities to tell that story in different ways and finding the right way for the right story rather than just dictating one way of doing it. And I think that's why kind of thinking just about lectures is not perhaps the right way to do it. Because you're kind of locking yourself into something that's easy to do, but isn't necessarily the right way to do it. Stepping out of the lecture theatre and leading by example is a better way to do. You have to have a creative environment and an environment that fosters creativity. A chap called Chris Bilton at university, part of the Cultural Policy Studies department, wrote a very good book, and he said to me that we pay lots of money for people to go off and do creativity courses, and we go and teach them how to innovate, and we teach them to be entrepreneurial, and we teach them to be creative, and then we send them back to their little booths, their little rooms, and then we expect them to get on with their day jobs, and we never give people the space to actually then be creative. And it's his opinion that this country wastes, hundreds of thousands of pounds of, probably more than that, of money teaching people to be creative and then never letting them actually do it. And I'm a great fan of, I don't know how achievable this is in a university context, of Google's attitude of giving everybody 15% of their time to go and work on what the hell they like. And that some of Google's some best products have come out of that. That may be an urban myth, but it's an urban myth I quite like. At Warwick, we've kind of tried to create environments that are available for people to play. The one on the left is the learning grid. The one on the right is the teaching grid. There's a theme here. The one on the top is the postgraduate reading room, which kind of breaks the theme. But each of these spaces is designed to allow people to be creative and do interesting things. The learning grid is a student space. It's customizable. They can muck about. In there are video creation services. They can go in and edit video. They can do all sorts of things in there. Staff are not meant to be in there. It's a student-owned space. The students run it. The students decide how it wants. The people who are in there doing the advisory capacity are students. They're not members of staff. It's very much a student-owned space. And there's some wonderful stuff that comes out of that. The teaching grid is a very similar environment, but for academics, being able to go in and find space in which to experiment and try out new things. It's also about some of the these are a couple of examples of little pockets of creativity that we have. This is Steve Ramford. As I said, I stand on the shoulders of giants, and I will not try and claim credit for anything that's not mine. Steve Ramford came up with this, which is a flat pack video booth. It's a cardboard collapsible IKEA-style video booth that can be produced for, well, I was going to say pennies, but not very much. But it has a cheap little ePC, Asus PC in it, touchscreen and a webcam, and there's a student using it. And we can just pop these things up and down as and when we need them. The idea being that we can use these to kind of make video capture ubiquitous. It's not necessarily, we know that students have got their own cameras and things, but these are more opportunities just popping up around campus for people to kind of capture video, to use video as a way of reflecting on things. And we pop these up all over orientation week this week with the new start of term. That's a picture of me taking a picture of it, taking a picture of me. And it's brilliant. I mean, it's a fantastic thing. Costs, it doesn't cost a huge amount of money, but it's incredibly portable. We can just pop them up, pop them down, and do what we like with them. Steve Carpenter, munching on a flapjack. I think he's sat in the room over there. Hello, Steve. Steve does a lot of stuff at the back end with video stuff, so he does a lot of the kind of the crunching and things that I don't understand, but comes up with some wonderful things, such as on our blog system. I can go in and actually create a, well, let's do this world viewable. Let's humiliate myself in public. But I can go in, and this is just Warwick's own sort of blogging system. We'll run a test from FOTE, and I can just go in and record an audio-video file straight like that, and say, hello, everybody. Everyone goes, yay! They all go, yay. Yay! Unfortunately, I haven't got this plugged in for sound, so you just wasted your effort there. So I can stop that, save that. And then if I publish this, go back to my blog, and that's pretty much live video capture straight into my blog. And so that's available to all students. We can do that in the Site Builder content management system, and it's just available to staff and students to do with as they will. Because what we're trying to do is provide them with a decent toolkit. We're not trying to dictate to them how they do it. And again, remember, I'm a communications PR person. We're not trying to dictate to anybody how they communicate. We're just giving people the way to do it. And encouraging skills. We got some great students doing some wonderful things. And each year we run a thing called Warwick Shootout, which invites them to come up with short films. They're in-camera edited, and they've got to do this over a weekend. But we like it as a way of kind of encouraging our student community to sort of get used to video, get using the cameras, and doing really interesting things with them. And this is a film that was shot, this was the winning film, and I advise anybody who's interested to go and look at this on YouTube, because it is brilliant. It's a really, really clever piece of film. But it's fun, and it's not, you know, it's doing things slightly differently. And there are opportunities at Warwick. If you're a postgraduate student in a doctoral centre, you can do media communications as a core part of their curriculum. So we do the media training with them, teach them how to do stuff. They get used to handling cameras, they get used to it. It's just part of the kind of skills development that we make available to them. Again, we don't tell them what to do with it, but the training is there, the ability to develop the skills, and just embed it in how you do things. And this is really, it's a very, very clever piece of film. It's slightly spooky as well. So I think what we're trying to do at Warwick is to try and develop a culture of creativity that leads by example and showcases excellence. You know, we're the communications office and e-learning and others, we're still going to do our thing too, but use it as a way of helping others gain confidence and build confidence with the technologies. And I think that's why the last couple of years of developing podcasts and the video has been really valuable, because I think we now have a faculty that are ready to use this stuff in a big way and make it part of the core. It's not extraordinary for them anymore, it's ordinary. And I know that sounds dull, but it's how this stuff kind of becomes part of the norm. We're certainly investing in skills, both formal as part of the teaching environment, but also informal, with competitions like Warwick Shootout and the Warwick Podcast Competition, encouraging students and staff to have fun with this stuff and to play with it and experiment, not just think about how they can incorporate it into an e-learning module or something. It's trying to find different ways of using it and giving them opportunities to do that. Supporting the extraordinary and the innovators. I mean, that's where the great ideas come from. And making sure that they are able to do what they need to do, what they want to do, what they are inspired to do, because they are the inspiring people, they are the inspirational people who will lead by example, who are the people that we want to showcase. But that alongside that, it's about building those sustainable structures for the ordinary, and then migrating that, as John said, into the core of what we do. Not making it this kind of contextual, this periphery stuff, but concentrating it in what an institution is and what we are. And that's where that transformational change that Steve Bobrick's talking about at the BBC starts to embed itself within higher education, so that that kind of moment of goonish genius that we seem to be going through at the moment then becomes the norm. And we look back in 5, 10, 15 years' time and say, 2008, when I was sat at that FOTE conference, that was the point of creativity and genius at which, now I look back and I can say that was where that began. And that's where that transformation change happened. And that's where the second era begins, about now. Thank you.